Hi there. Welcome. My name is Cindy Lopez, and I'm the Director of Community Connections at CHC. So, we're so glad that you're able to join us today for this live Ask an Expert session. And just so you know, we are recording the session. So, it will be available in the next week to 10 days in our online resource library where you can access it free. Just a few words about CHC for those of you who may not be as familiar. CHC has been part of our local community for about 70 years, providing mental health and learning services for children, teens, and young adults. And we offer both evaluation and treatment, as well as free 30-minute parent consultations with one of our clinicians. Please check out our website at chconline.org. As I mentioned previously, we have a free, robust online resource library with lots of resources, including articles and recordings of our past parent ed sessions that you'll find valuable. And we also have our Voices of Compassion podcast series that we just started in last fall on topics that really matter to you as parents. So we hope you'll take advantage of our services. Today's session, this Ask an Expert session, thank you. Before we get started, I should note that you will be, you're muted, your video and audio is off for this session, but please feel free to use the chat to chat with us, make any comments, or use the Q&A feature, use the Q&A feature to add any questions that you might like us to answer in the second half. And we'll make sure that we leave ample time in the second half for your questions. So the first half is a conversation with our expert, Dr. Lazo, and then the second half are your questions. We'll get your questions answered in the second half. The topic today is family. So family, they are the people you love most in the world, but living with them 24/7 under one roof can be stressful and filled with tension. So between sheltering in place and school at home and work at home, how do you keep everything going, right? Even small things that never bothered you are major irritants now. And now you have the added tension of thinking about kind of re-emerging, like that re-entry as we're starting to come out on the other side of COVID. And probably if you have kids, even your spouse, you may have all different ideas of what that should look like. So how do you as a parent navigate all of this and support your family? So we are having that conversation today with our expert, Dr. Alex Lazo. He's a psychologist at CHC, and we're so thankful that he's here with us today to share his experience and expertise with us. Welcome, Dr. Lazo.
Hi there, good afternoon.
So this has been kind of a strange time for families, right? We have sheltering in place, we have school at home, we have work at home, and this type of role strain is taking its toll on families, parents especially. So can you talk a little bit about that role strain and its impact on family dynamics?
Sure, like you were saying, sheltering in place, school distance learning, working from home, there's added role strain. And, I think using the same word, there's added roles. Parents become teachers, roles that they're not supposed to play. Parents become sort of their own bosses, trying to keep themselves accountable. And then kids become sort of their own bosses as well, where they have to stay on top of stuff. And so they have to take so many different roles, which then brings stress into the family. We have kids saying, don't tell me to do, stop hovering over me to do my work, or parents, because parents don't entirely understand how distance learning might be. And parents feel like they, or families who, people who are working, don't necessarily have the haven't naturally or have naturally just gone to work and been accountable by just showing up at work. And so so then they have to have that added responsibility to stay on top of things in the home while doing so many other things. So I think that has impacted both on the unit level and as well as the individual level. Um, you know, just people living autonomously in the home, but also living together and trying to navigate that as an individual, but also trying to navigate that as a unit.
So thinking about that type of strain that's going on, and you mentioned the unit, so family unit versus the individual, um, and there's there can be a lot of strain because of all those kind of competing priorities, and because each person in the family probably has their own. If you have a teen, their priorities are different than their parents' priorities, to be sure. And so how do you talk about all that? And I think that one thing is, when you're all 24/7 at home under one roof, the boundaries that used to be present are not, right? There used to be more of a separation between home and school and work. But with all of that now happening under one roof, how do you establish healthy boundaries at home with your family?
Yeah, definitely a good question. And it goes back to what I was saying about we sort of had these natural boundaries set up for us. We had to get up at a certain time because we have to get everyone ready and out the door, and we get in the car, we go to our jobs or we go to school because we have a time limit or time constraint to live by. And we spend time alone at school or at home or at work, and that's set up for us. So I think the boundaries, really, it's going back to some ABCs, is knowing what your boundaries were and are. So if your boundary was that you spent the majority of your day focusing on some of your priorities, that has to be translated to this new life, that we've had in the past year. Does that mean, when I wake up, I've always focused on, showering, getting ready. I don't automatically talk to anyone. So does that mean telling your kid, look, if you get up before me, or your spouse, if you get up, before me, I'm so used to not talking to anyone. So give me a moment, give me, a few minutes to get up and, wake up for the day. You can watch TV, you can play Lego, you can help me get the family ready. But being clear, first of all, to yourself, what your boundaries are. And then being able to, well, that would make it clearer to others, for you to communicate to them. So boundaries are important, but we first have to know what those are and realize that what boundaries were sort of naturally set up for us before this.
So that's interesting because I think about boundaries, and we may not, um, one is, because it's been such a part of our existence, like we haven't thought about those things as boundaries. Um, um, so I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts or tips about how people might become more aware of the boundaries that they have. And then maybe, how do you, like you just mentioned a couple things, but how do you have that conversation with your spouse? Like maybe you could give like a couple examples.
Yeah, sure. I mean, most of us would love to be so insightful that we can just know ourselves that easily. Sometimes it's trial and error. Sometimes we realize, wow, these last couple of days I've been really irritated in the morning. And if I look back at it, it's because I have my kid jumping in my bed, first thing in the morning. I have, things on my mind that I have to get to. So maybe I need to consider what boundaries I need or I had before. People have more time being at home with each other. So looking back on how that might have impacted them individually and the unit can give us some information about what boundaries we need to create or, and then establish. So like I said, if it is, if your days start out a little more active than they did before, you might want to, set your alarm, at a time that you feel like it's appropriate for you and the family, right? And then if you need that quiet time, go out for a 3 to 5 minute walk, right? That gives you you don't have to do much to get the alone time if you just walk out the door by yourself and go for a few minute walk. So there are ways that you can do things that will kind of give you that automatic alone time or boundary. The other example is communicating about what might be getting on your nerves, and not because you're blaming anyone, but because you're being honest, right? And it's better to put it out there now than to let it bottle up and you just carry on that irritability or frustration, throughout this time. So to communicate saying, it's really tough for me to, be at home all day. This is something I need. And make it a conversation, a discussion. Okay, well, this is what I need. What would be realistic for us, if it's your spouse or your family, for me to obtain this need? If I go on a walk, is everyone going to be okay? You know, um, that because I need that for myself.
Not to spend too much time on this point, but I'm also thinking about like teens. So their boundary, like, doing everything at home now, right? Everything's online. Um, how how might a parent help teens or their kids understand what their own boundaries are? So if they're, so in other words, as a parent, I might see that my teen is really annoyed with me, right? Because I'm in their space when they're trying to get online with their friends or whatever, right? So their teen may not even be aware of all of that, right? So how might you, you know, you see that your teen is annoyed, they're not expressing it. How can you help your child express
Right.
that?
Yeah, I mean, the gift of trial and error is where this is where what you're talking about is where, sort of seeing this reaction to our, hovering or, checking in, which again, that's part of the strain. Like parents feel like they have this responsibility to be engaged with their family, but there are boundaries, right? So my first step for, that I recommend for most families is just to empathize and to bring in some awareness and insight. Wow, you get really irritated when I bother you or when I check in on you. Maybe I should do that less. Would that help? And probably you'll get a yes. Do not come, for let's give it a couple of days. But that's where we listen to each other. That's where we have a conversation. Because when you say, wow, you're getting really irritated when I check in on you or ask you all these questions, it's not a judgment. It's the insight, it's awareness that they can connect, that they're probably feeling irritable because you've been crossing a boundary they didn't even realize they had. And now you can be setting up, identifying, and establishing boundaries by saying, okay, I ask too many questions, or I check in on you too much. Maybe I should only really check on you when you're ready for me to do that. And then they can say, oh wow, yeah, I didn't realize that. It's clear to me.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Dr. Lazo. So switching gears a little bit, as we think about this reemerging, right, after COVID, as everyone's kind of starting to do in various degrees, right? Um, it's possible that family members may have different ideas about what that would look like. So how can parents handle that a productive way. Maybe think about some talk tracks, so to speak, or conversations parents might have with their families.
Right. Well, we already have uh, uh, people like the CDC telling us what we should and shouldn't be doing. So if you are having conversations with your family, it's likely they've heard what they can, shouldn't, and shouldn't do. Obviously, everyone is up to do whatever they feel comfortable and safe doing. But because we sort of feel shut down, in the literal sense, we don't want to shut each other down. We want to have a conversation and a discussion. If someone has an idea, we want to be able to see through why they're having that idea. Why do our kids want to hang out with their friends in person more? It's because they miss the social keys they haven't been getting. Do we shut that down and say, no, it's not safe to get with your friends in person? Or do we say, hey, what are your plans? What have you guys talked about? Well, you know, how do you feel about being in person with your friends? Are you excited? Are you a bit scared because of what we've been through in this past year? Um, I feel this way. So is there a compromise? Can you meet in a public outside space? So it's a conversation and not a shutdown. We have to remember that we've been told for this past year and a half what to do. So no one really wants to be told what to do. We want to be heard, and that's where the empathy is important. Wow, I know you're really bummed about not being able to be out and about. I am too, in my own way. What are some of your ideas? What have been some of your ideas? Yeah, and some of the resources that we'll provide kind of give specific um, uh, situations that might come up. Uh,
So, that speaking of resources, just so you know, we have a slide that we'll share toward the end that has some articles and other resources on it. And you don't have to worry about trying to like write all those down because they will be available in the recording as well. So, which will be again available online in the next week to 10 days on in our online resource library. So, thinking about all this re-emerging, right? And you were just saying like we have been for the past year we've been told what to do, right? We stay in your house, wear a mask, stay 6 feet apart, um, don't don't do things with people that you don't live with, you know. Um, so there's it just feels like there's a little bit less right now. I mean, but it has felt like there's so much out of our control. And so families are feeling that. And what are some things that we can practice in the family right now to help that? I mean, I think one of the things you just said was empathy, right? And how can parents empathize, but also give their, I imagine there's also some sibling tension, right?
mhm.
So we've been talking a lot about parents and kids, but maybe reference some of the sibling interaction that might be coming up as well.
Yeah. Well, and of course, it, it's worth repeating. Having discussions and being open, having a space where it's not about judgment or being shut down, right? Being able to listen to each other. But I think there are ways that we can be in control. I think, understandably so, this whole year has sort of what we've heard in the media and what we've heard from experts and professionals is very fear-based, right? Because we are in a pandemic. But there are ways that on individual and family unit levels, we can take back some control. We can create structure. We can in our days, we can create routines. We can establish boundaries that benefit individuals and the unit. Everything we've been talking about is really actually taking back some control, and giving people permission to have a little bit more say in how they're how they function in their lives right now. Same with siblings. If siblings have boundaries, um, again, parents have this bound or this expectation, and maybe comparing to other families, or being told that they shouldn't be engaging with each other. But like I said, naturally we've had our alone times or separate times, and so if that's what siblings need, they're always going to be siblings. And then and won't be, forcing them won't give them any sort of motivation or internal motivation to engage with each other. So looking past that and reading more into it, what they're typically saying is, I need this. And parents could develop the skill to understand what their needs are, even if they're not communicating it. Usually if siblings are fighting, the need is they probably need sometimes separate from each other.
Yeah, thank you. And to our audience, thank you for adding questions. Those are really helpful to us, and we'll get to address those in just a minute. Just wondering, Dr. Lazo, thinking about parents themselves, obviously, because those are probably the people who are in our audience today. What can they do to ensure, hopefully, maybe ensure, that they don't reach their breaking point? What are some specific strategies or tools you might be able to share with them on that front?
Sure. Yeah. What I find in my work with parents and families is that people have a hard time giving themselves permission to take care of themselves and to prioritize themselves. I think there's a lot of things that play into that. I think that they can't, some can't. We have single parents who can't think about themselves, a lot of the time. Or we have families going through difficult times, and increased work or decreased work, or there's a lot of reasons. So understanding that your best, or just enough, is your best, right? And that we're not looking for perfection, especially at this time. So I think the expectation and the permission is a conversation I have a lot. I have with a lot of families. So I think to prevent or to avoid burnout or breakdowns is um, establishing new expectations for yourself. Do I have to come through with my family every time or every day? Can I take a break? And then giving yourself permission for whatever your needs are. I do tell parents, you need to socialize as much. Most of the things that your kids need, you need. And if you can't do that for yourself, how are you going to do that for them? And so the biggest conversation I have is usually around permission, giving yourself permission to prevent the breakdown or the burnout.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that giving yourself permission is really important, and it's exercising a little self-compassion, right? We have this talk track, or at least I do, maybe not everyone, that, when I make a mistake or do something that was like, that is not what I intended, in my head, I'm going, come on, Lopez, like, get it together, right? So what I'm saying to myself is not necessarily the most compassionate response I could have for myself. And I think that's not unusual, right? So it's a little, and also it brings some growth mindset, things to mind in terms of, well, yep, I made a mistake, but next time I'm gonna do this and this. I learned from that, right? I'm gonna do it differently next time, or whatever. So there's a lot of, for me anyway, that conversation that goes on inside my head to myself. If I could change that track to be a little bit more self-compassionate, that would be great. And as you noted too, Dr. Lazo, like you're good enough is good enough. Um, be okay with that. Really be okay with that. We say that a lot, and we've said it a lot. We have a podcast series that I host, and um, we've said that a lot on in different ways over the past year. So thinking about that whole compassion piece, actually, um, what role does compassion play in family dynamics?
Yeah, I think compassion opposes, in this case, judgment, right? So, and that's how I see it. When we are not being compassionate, we're being judgmental, not in the sense, that in the normal sense we see it, or the stigma that judgment has. It means that we assume things, or we don't completely understand things. Um, and so compassion, what the lens of compassion helps us to practice patience, where we don't feel so compelled to just assume things, or make sort of judgments on what's happening. It allows us to sort of sit with what's happening, understand it a little bit, and then make appropriate or healthier choices, right? So when we judge, we jump to conclusions, and we kind of limit our ability to respond. But when we have a compassionate lens, we say to ourselves, okay, I understand what I'm going through. Maybe I shouldn't feel so bad about that. Maybe I shouldn't be so hard on myself about making that mistake. um and good is good enough is good enough, right? But I also think practice doesn't make perfect, it really just makes better, right? So practice makes better. If I practice self-compassion more, I'll hopefully get better at it. If I practice compassion more towards others, hopefully I'll get better at it. It's not something we're striving for perfection. We're striving just to get better at making less assumptions, being less reactive, and being more open to the experience of ourselves and of experience others have, to make healthier and better choices for ourselves and others.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of questions from the audience. This parent asks if we could say more about the ways that parents can and should recognize key symptoms of tension in children, and what to look for in terms of behavior or performance or social adaptation or whatever. Like, what should parents be? What would they be seeing
Mhm.
if the tension was, exhibiting itself in,
Our kids, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, on a reduction, on a reduced level, we think of like anxiousness or depressive mood, right? We're either really down or really worried, um, especially in this case, in this time. What's super clear, what we see in studies is, and just sort of criteria, is kids are irritable when they're either feeling sad or worried. And they're typically feeling sad about how things have been, looking back, oh my gosh, it's been a year and I haven't seen my friends, or it's been a year and I'm still stuck in home, not going to school, or I'm not doing well in school. Or they're worried because they're like, I don't know where this is going. It's so uncertain. And so what we see in terms of the tension in our kids is irritability, withdrawal. So if we see that they're maybe spending less time engaging, that's a tough one, because you have to balance, do they need that as a boundary? Or is it sort of, concerning, where it isn't at the level that they were functioning, initially. Um, yeah, so those are the two big ones, actually, the withdrawal and the irritability.
so thinking about things, So as we know, the data, right, around mental health, and the impact COVID has had on mental health, um, we know that people, teens, adults, are reporting more mental health challenges, anxiety, right? At this time this year versus this time last year, or even the year before when we were pre-COVID, totally. So what things might be parents seeing? Like I'm thinking about, and it might be different. Seeing some things you might see in younger children, some different things you might see in teens. So, like behavior around, like regression. If they're your school age child is like now coming into your bedroom every night, and because they can't sleep for one reason or another, or your younger child is experiencing some bedwetting or something. So there are those kinds of things. And then there are, I think, also things where the behavior, whatever the behavior is, that negative behavior that might keep your kids from engaging, like things that they did before that they're not doing now. So, and that, they're closing, as you said, withdrawal, they're closing themselves in their rooms or whatever. Do you have any comments on that, on those?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about behavioral approaches or, behaviors coming up, it's never as beneficial to focus on the negative behaviors or the behaviors that have sort of developed out of stress or anxiety or sadness. We want to focus on the positive behaviors, the behaviors we want to see more. So if your child or adolescent is, exhibiting some behaviors, of course, it's understandable why that would be concerning. But if they come out for dinner, you push for, wow, I really like the time we get to spend during dinner. Even though we're home and we don't get to see each other very much because we're working or distance learning, I really like this time. Make it fun, right? Make it something that would reinforce that behavior. But there is a reason why those behaviors are coming out. It's usually out of the environment, and not caused by parents, but caused by the pandemic and the challenges we face with that. And it's expected that their behaviors would change, but we want to focus on reinforcing the more positive behaviors.
So a follow-up question on that, um, is can you comment on when parents should seek help? When when is intervention needed for help with managing and addressing some of the tensions in the family, that tensions that are causing disruption in the family, inappropriate behavior from kids? When is it important for parents to try to address that by seeking help?
Yeah. I like to tell parents they're experts in their families. They are. I mean, they know most about how their family unit functions. Um, I think that there's never too early of a time. I'm a huge advocate for early intervention and prevention. So if you feel like maybe this might take a toll on your family, it's okay to reach out for support. It's not because anything is broken or there's potential for disaster. It's because you have enough awareness and insight that preventing anything, burnout, breakdowns, tantrums, family conflicts would be beneficial for your family. If prevention wasn't really considered at first and we're starting to see symptoms, I usually like to say, look at functioning. Are they showering? Are they holding up their daily functioning, what they used to do because of their routines? How's their social functioning? Do they have at least one friend? I always tell kids, if you've made one friend, I know you know how to make friends. So I don't need you to be, have a huge social circle. How are they academically functioning? Have their grades decreased significantly? Because passing to me is functioning. But have they decreased significantly because of some factors, environmental factors like not having access to teachers as much? Um, so yeah, those are some things that I would consider important when looking for support. It's never too early to reach out for support and prevent some stuff. Um, and then functioning is a huge way that I see uh, tension growing or becoming chronic.
Yeah, thank you. I think part of what's coming out of this question too is it sounds like there might be some behavior with the kids or a child that is disrupting the entire family. And so, eh, um, is it important? This was a follow-up, another kind of question along these lines. Is it important for parents to consider psychological or psychiatric intervention specifically um, when you're trying to address those kinds of issues?
Yeah, as a clinical psychologist, I think any information is good information. I think that same concept applies to parents. Any information you receive is good information. So if you do feel like there's this functional regression or increase in behaviors that might be contributing to tension at home, more fights or defiance or opposition, it's okay to reach out for support from a clinical psychologist or psychiatry just to get a little bit more education about what the services provide. And then I usually tell families it's no judgment there. You can decide what you feel like is best for you and your family. As long as you have the information, you can move forward with that however you feel. Because there are people who have their opinions about medications. There are people who have their opinions about how therapy can work. Um, and that's okay to have those opinions, but we want you to have a more informed opinion about moving forward with support if that's necessary.
Yeah, and so this is probably a good point to say too. Like, so that's CHC, right? So we have services, as Alex is one of our psychologists, and excuse me, Dr. Lazo is one of our psychologists, and you can find out more. You can reach out chconline.org, select clinical services, ask for an appointment. You can start with a free parent consultation if you're just not sure, you're confused, and you're not sure about next steps. That free parent consultation can provide some information and guidance, advice about possible next steps. So, yeah, I if you're considering it, so I've been working in education for about 30 years and have had thousands of conversations with parents around your child's learning, right? And so I often say, when I was head of Sandhill School at CHC for a number of years, and I often say to parents when they would come to see me about possible admission to Sandhill, well, how do I know if this is really the right option for my child? Maybe I don't need this, right? Maybe I don't need this much intervention right now. Um, and my response is always, trust your gut. You, as a parent, you're an expert on your child, and so trust that. And if your instinct is to reach out and seek help, then we encourage you to do that. You can start by just reaching out to family or friends and trying to get some feedback. And just know that we are here for you. We also have free parent support groups through our community education services. So please feel free to reach out.
Yeah, and help. What I was going to add to that was that help and support is a double-edged sword, right? You find that you might need help, and that's a struggle because maybe you feel like you shouldn't, right? And maybe you should be having everything together. again, that's your expectation. But then the other side is, once you know that there's something that needs to be addressed, you can get the help, right? So it is something that has to be worked through, and acceptance has to happen. But again, just knowing that you have the support, and then you making going with your intuition and going with your gut, um, is the next step.
So here's thinking about our conversation about boundaries, rules and teens. And yes, we have a shared sense of what the rules are, so to speak, with COVID from CDC and others who want to tell us. But there is something about teenagers, right? That they're kind of testing, right, all the time, and is this rule really apply to me, right? So how can parents kind of deal with the normal, whatever normal is, rule breaking when the risk seems high?
Right, right. I like to think of riding a wave, surfing the wave. Okay, that role seems to be there. It seems to be something that's being pushed back on. What about it is restrictive, or what about it is drawing out this opposition, from my kid, from specifically from my teenager. And even again, having compassion for yourself, saying maybe that rule isn't working right now. um, I maybe have to look at this from a different angle, and maybe I should get some feedback from my kid. Like, what is it about this that is making you want to push back on it? Again, we're all being told what to do, so I understand you're struggling. Empathy, right? I understand you're struggling with this rule. I mean, or is it just the fact that you're wanting to push back because that's just what you're wanting to do? I get it. That's just something we want to do. But, with parents, I also discuss, that rules and boundaries will be pushed. And what might reinforce the behavior you don't want to see is giving into it, right? Um, so it is sort of that balance of, there are things that really protect us from the dangers of the pandemic, but having a conversation, empathizing about it, seeing your child's perspective can soften um, the interaction and the conflict.
Yeah, that empathy and compassion really goes a long way. For yourself as well as for your family and others. So this next question is a parent who says, I've been teaching my child about body autonomy for years, right? And how do I, as a parent, explain that she doesn't get to make a choice here? Like this, it's about, your safety and health.
Mhm.
And so it feels like those two things could be somewhat you know um in contrast
Yeah.
with one another. So do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this would most likely come in age, and usually we see adolescents bringing this up, like, it's my body, it's my life, I get to do. Um, Again, it's okay to empathize. Like, yes, our society says we are individuals. Our communities say we should have choices, um, but helping them develop a healthy perspective taking. How do you think other people are dealing with this? How do you think other people feel about having to be told what to do with their bodies and how to protect them? um, when are times that you feel, and when you're talking to your adolescent, when are times you feel like this benefits us to think about, agreeing with how we should use our bodies and protect our bodies, and when are times does it kind of work against um, our own perspective, our choices? um, it's okay to come in with, again, less judgment and assumptions that they just want to use their bodies for whatever or do whatever in their lives. And more so, it's developmentally appropriate for adolescents and pre-adolescents to explore independence. That is sort of how our, communities and local societies, that's something we've inherited. And so when they are exploring independence and autonomy, we have to keep in mind, or we should keep in mind, that it's developmentally appropriate. That's how their brains are developing and functioning at that stage. So even being aware of that, you want to explore, well, how do I balance the autonomy and the independence, but also, how this affects other people.
Yeah, that's a good point, I think. Just having that conversation. And I think if you're always, as you mentioned, Dr. Lazo, always, don't make assumptions. Just start the conversation, right? In a way that is, that starts out by saying, I'm seeing whatever, whatever behavior you're seeing versus, why do you do that?
Sure.
um,
Yeah.
you know, just if you can be, as a parent, if you can kind of pull yourself back and just talk about facts, like what you see and what you observe versus what you assume they might be feeling or the way you're feeling because of that. So
Right. And well, that doesn't only work to benefit your child or your family. It works to benefit you. With assumptions comes stress and angst. Oh, I'm so frustrated because this is how it's happening. And it's like, well, let's take a step back and maybe give yourself a break and from your assumptions, and know that maybe there's a reason behind this. Maybe there's something that will help you see this in a less stressful way.
Yeah, I even noticed that when I'm talking, when with my husband, right? When there's some conflict between us, and I build it up in my own mind, but the minute I can start talking to him about it, it kind of dissipates as we talk. So, it's always a good thing to communicate. So, Dr. Lazo, so to our audience, you'll see resources on the screen. Dr. Lazo, I'm thinking about, you've offered so many great suggestions, strategies, ways for parents to open up conversations with their kids. Like, what do you think? What do you hope that the audience would walk away with as a result of having attended this session today?
Yeah, I mean, I wish that I could give something so magical, and but I think what I've seen has worked is the empathizing with each other, because it does give everyone a break. It gives yourself a break. It gives others a break. And I found that I think it does end up happening in a magical way, or uh, what it feels like, and I think what that releases is expectations that might not work the same as how they might have worked before. And then permission to have your experience and for others to have their experiences, and for us to have an opportunity to understand each other. I think that's what empathy and permission gives us, the gifts that it gives us.
So, as we wrap up, just wanted to share our contact information again with you all. So, you can reach out to us by phone or online. We have a care team, our clinical services coordinators are at the end of that email, and they can help you if you wanted to schedule um, a parent consultation, one of those free parent consultations. If you wanted to find out more about an evaluation or therapy, they can answer some questions for you. And again, you can access a lot of our free resources online at chconline.org. Our resource library is there. We have other sessions like this coming up, and we do a podcast every week. So thank you again to our audience for joining us today. And thank you, Dr. Lazo, for your time and expertise as well.